Hey, this is Erich Hunter here, and I want to talk about a subject that is near and dear to me. It's the topic of magic. Now, this may seem like it's coming out of left field given that I normally talk about pendulum healing, but it turns out that pendulum healing, and in fact, all alternative healing modalities are a form of magic. So it's very important for us to understand what magic is, what it isn't, and that way we can use magic to help us in our lives because we're already using it already, but most of us just don't realize it. So having an understanding of what magic is will give us the ability to more effectively use magic to help us achieve our aims and to help us be more effective, lead better lives, raise consciousness, help people to do better. So let's jump into this. I made a presentation here for us to watch. And the topic of this presentation is, what is magic? So this seems like a pretty obvious thing. Like when you say the word magic, everyone has sort of their own opinion about what magic is, what it means. And while it seems like one of those words that, yeah, everyone just knows what it is, it turns out it's actually very hard to define it. And this has been a real serious issue intellectually, but also practically as well. So here's a quote from a really famous, famous in the occult world. let me say very thorough and awesome. Let's just put it that way. Maybe not famous. To me, he's famous, but thorough and awesome scholar, Owen Davies. And he has a quote here that defining magic is like a maddening task. And that this is why people often avoid trying to define magic or give a definition of it. And he's absolutely right. So when you ask a person who does magic what magic is, or you ask a lay person just what is magic, you get many different answers. When you ask an intellectual, a scholar, you get different answers. And this has been a problem like in the scholastic literature because scholars can't agree on what magic is, what it isn't, how do you distinguish it from science, how do you distinguish it from religion, and it's this real big fuzzy area here. And let me show you a few quotes from magicians in the past that will kind of illustrate this. And there are many, many definitions of magic, but I'd say most of them generally fall into one of these categories. So one of the most famous definitions was by Aleister Crowley, and it's the science and art of causing change in conformity with will. So this is one of the most common definitions of magic, and I see this repeated over and over again in the literature by different authors, different people. Now, interestingly, while this has some validity to it, magicians are often trying to impose what they want on the world and make a change. This is not really a great definition. And when you read Aleister Crowley's works more carefully, you find out that this definition doesn't really hold. So for example, he goes on to say, in terms of magic, we must not exclude potato growing or banking in our definition. Let us take the very simple example of a magical act, that of a man blowing his nose. So there is a lot of irreverence here, a lot of humor, and this has been taken to the extreme by chaos magicians. It's no longer cutting edge, but for a while in the 90s and the 2000s, it was kind of cutting edge of magic, this chaos magic, this idea that anything goes, you can do anything you want, there's no definition, it's just all whatever you want, to happen can happen. That doesn't really hold true if you're practicing magic, and this definition, there is somewhat of an imposition of will, but you're not, especially like pendulum healing. We do magic all the time, but we're not making things conform to our will. We're trying to shift reality in the highest good of all, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Maybe it wasn't in the highest good. So we're not trying to make things conform to our will. We're trying to push things in the direction we want them to go if it's in the highest good of all. And generally, we're trying to raise consciousness. But we're not trying to force anything. So this definition doesn't really fit. There are many types of magic that don't involve, reality conforming to your will. And it does matter. You can't just do anything. No, sorry, potato growing and blowing your nose are typically not magical acts, even though like chaos magic would like to say that. It's not really a great definition, although it sounds cool. All right, now another one here the Sir James G. Fraser. He's one of the most famous anthropologists who ever lived, and he wrote a book called The Golden Bough, which had giant sections of the book dealing with magic historically. And the reason I put this definition in here is that his view epitomizes the modern day academic view of magic. Even scholars studying magic, like in anthropology departments and universities, they adhere to his view. And his view is that basically magic is a fraud, that it's not a science, it's just, he called it an abortive art and a fallacious guide of conduct and a spurious system of natural law. So basically, he thought it was just pure garbage. And that has been the predominant view that intellectuals have held, at least since the 1700s. And it's really prevalent nowadays with materialism being so deeply entrenched. You know, people who are in academia, people who are doing research on magic scholars, they typically have this view. Okay. Now, another view, which is different, was that of Austin Spare. He's kind of an oddball. He was an oddball, sort of a maverick magician who gave rise to the chaos magic through his work on sigils. And I do value his work on sigils a lot. It's really good stuff. But anyway, his definition, I think, is closer in some ways. He says magic, but he also refers to magic as faith. Now, I have some issue with that, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But he says magic is simply a means of unifying desire and belief. The subconscious mind is employed to create your belief and unite it to a real desire. So I do agree with him that, you know, as a magician, many times it is your desire for something to happen, and you might have a belief around that. Okay. So, but that's not necessarily true. The desire part is true. You have to want to make some change for magic to occur. And I guess it helps if you believe in what you're doing, but honestly, like with pendulums, even if you don't necessarily believe it, it can still work if you go through the motions. But the problems I have with this definition are the subconscious mind. For example, in the type of magic I teach, pendulum healing, I encourage people to move away from the subconscious mind, to try to do things as consciously as possible. Because I found that the subconscious mind is like a source of frustration. It's a source of past hurts, memories of the past. It's really not in the present moment very much, and it's not really the greatest guide in many ways. So I don't really believe that you have to have your subconscious mind unified with your magical practice. In fact, I think your subconscious mind could even get in the way, and it's better to do forms of magic that do not involve the subconscious if possible, or at least attempt to bypass it. The other problem I have with this definition is faith. I do not think that magic is faith. I think magic is more like science. It's testable. You can try it and see if you get results. Now, you know, in a laboratory, they have tested various aspects of magic, and there is a book I'm going to talk about. There are scientific papers out there, even though scientists watching this may be aghast and skeptics will be horrified to learn. There have been peer-reviewed studies that have demonstrated that there are strong evidence that some aspects, at least, of what we call occult magic is, you know, verifiable. But still, you can do your own more informal experiments for yourself. And the way I viewed it is you do enough of these little mini experiments, and after a while, it goes beyond confirmation bias. It goes beyond placebo effect. There's definitely something else going on here that's interesting. Okay, now another modern day author, Stephen Skinner, he writes really awesome, well-researched, revised texts. So he takes ancient texts and then he translates them, revises them, and he brings magic to modern audiences, magic from the past. Now, his definition of magic is unlike Aleister Crowley and Austin Spare. His definition is very, very restricted. So he says that magic is causing change through the use of spiritual creatures rather than directly by physical means. And then he says these spiritual creatures are compelled or persuaded to assist by the use of sacred words, names, talismans, symbols, incense, sacrifices, and the materia magica. Okay, so what is Skinner talking about there? He's talking about medieval magic, Renaissance magic, Greco-Roman magic. These are older types of magic that where it was believed that you had to somehow bind spirits, bind demons. You had to control these spiritual beings in order to do the magic. But I asked him this, and he didn't really have an answer. I appreciate him and respect him a lot, but I said, like, what about my pendulum work that I do? It's magic. We're causing change. We're doing spells, essentially. Or what about prayer when someone prays and something happens? You know, like, well, I guess the prayer is you're not binding God, so maybe that's not the best example, but the pendulum is a really good one. You don't need to invoke any spirits. You don't need to bind any demons. You can do this. You know, there are other forms of magic like candle magic or sigil magic where you don't need to do any of those things that he said, and you can still get results and it's still magic. So I find this definition to be too limited. It is interesting, and this is one type of magic that was very common in the past, and some people still do it. But it's not the only thing. Magic is much broader than that. Okay. Another definition of magic from one of the masters, Eliphas Levi, another person who's really misunderstood. Magic is a traditional science of the secrets of nature, which has been transmitted to us by the Magi. So, you know, the word magic is supposed to come from Magi, supposed to go back to Persia. So he says, by means of this science, the adept becomes invested with a species of relative omnipotence and can operate superhumanly, that is, after a manner which transcends the normal possibility of men. So just to understand here, Eliphas Levi thought that magic was religious. He thought that Christ was a magician, and that men of God could learn magic and they could get the power of God, some little bit of it, here on earth through magical practice. That is something that is not understood about Eliphas Levi very much. But what about this idea that it has to be by the Magi? I have a real problem with that definition because, hey, you know, what about forms of magic that did not come from the Magi? I mean, were the Magi teaching people hoodoo? Were the Magi teaching people pendulum healing? Were the Magi teaching people other forms of energy healing or any other kind of magic out there like candle magic or something? No, they weren't. So this idea that magic has to be something that was, you know, passed on by adepts through the ages is nonsense. There are tons of people throughout all time, you know, going back to ancient shamans, witches, wizards, you know, all kinds of people doing magic throughout history, and they were not the Magi. Very few people who've done magic historically have been able to read or have any education. Most magic in the past was folk magic. And so this idea that that is what magic is way too limited. Okay, so we have these definitions of magic from some pretty heavy people, thinkers in the past. And I really searched the literature, you know, far and wide to try to get good definitions. And I was kind of surprised by the lack of a female voice in this, and also a lack of modern voices in this. So it's interesting. Most of the voices were male and they're from the past. I tried, you know, just didn't really find any really unique voices in those other areas, surprisingly. So that's something to think about. But what about this whole idea of magic, you know, because there is another thing called magic where people do tricks. Like how does occult magic, you know, like what we were talking about before, relate to all this stuff about tricks? Well, what it turns out is that up until the 1700s, you know, no one really thought about magic tricks that much. They called magic tricks something else. They called them juggling. They had different terms. They didn't call it magic. But what happened was in the 1700s, which is known as the Age of Reason, people began to reject superstitious beliefs. So, you know, we had witch trials going on in Europe, and we also had this Age of Reason where people like Ben Franklin were around, and there are all these other, you know, these intellectual revolutions going on. There are also like political revolutions like the French Revolution and things like that. So it was a time of change in European society. And people were like, you know, we are educated, learned, we have had enough of all this superstitious nonsense, all these witch trials, all this other stuff. This is just ridiculous. Magic isn't real, it's bogus. And at that point, there was a switch. So people who are educated started calling magic the trick magic, juggling. They started calling that magic. And the reason why is because they felt that magic by definition was impossible because it went against the ideals of the age of reason. So a really famous example of that is the commission that Benjamin Franklin was on in the 1700s to discredit the famous energy healer Anton Mesmer. Mesmer basically created a form of energy healing that was a precursor to pranic healing or Reiki therapy, and he was extremely popular in France and in Europe. Like, he was a sensation. And during the Age of Reason, that's a form of magic, by the way. I'm going to explain that in a minute. Energy healing is magic. So, he needed to be discredited, and Benjamin Franklin was one of the leading intellectuals of the time, and he helped to do that. So there has been a trend since the Age of Reason, since the 1700s, to separate magic, from the mainstream and to marginalize it, put it down, make people seem like they're crazy if they do it, and to equate it with trickery, with what they used to call juggling. Okay, now a very important distinction, however, was made by our friend, Mr. Crowley. Okay, so, Aleister Crowley did a great job because he realized that there was a big difference between doing tricks and doing occult magic. So what he said, he was the first person to say this, and I completely agree with him 100%, is that magic, which are the trivial things, the tricks, granted, some of them are pretty amazing. Those illusionists are incredible, blow your mind, but they're still, they're just tricks. They're trickery. They're not real magic. He said spell that with a C, but the occult magic, the paranormal magic, spell that with a CK. So I recognize that distinction. I think it's very valuable, and that's why I spell it with a CK, is because, not because of Crowley's teachings so much, but because I feel that that distinction is important, and he was the first one to make that distinction. So I want to give him credit for that as a scholar of magic. All right, now in the past, there were many, many different types of magic, and many of these are still practiced today. I've kind of summarized them here, and I'll just briefly go through it. A couple of highlights, though, is that throughout most of history, magic has generally been very low consciousness. So if you look at David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, magic typically bottoms out towards the low end of the scale. There is high consciousness magic, but it's just more rare. The consciousness of humanity was lower in the past. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, it was lower than it is today. So it makes sense that the magic would reflect the times. Still, people do these types of magic. So you often hear of different distinctions like black magic, white magic, ceremonial magic, folk magic. Some of those are important, some are not so important. But broadly speaking, magic can be divided up into the following categories, traditional magic, that is. There's a type of magic called Goetia, which is a ceremonial magic involving the summoning of partly or wholly evil demons and the binding of those demons to make them do magic for you. So that's kind of like what Dr. Skinner was talking about. Then there's another type of magic called theurgy, where the person makes an appeal, a prayer, a summoning of beneficial spirits, for example, like angels, to carry out the magic for you. Okay, then there's nigromancy, and nigro, it means black. It's not a racist term, it just means black. And it's a magical summoning of evil spirits. Then you have necromancy, which is a summoning of the dead, asking the dead to carry out magical operations for you. Then you have what's called practical Kabbalah. It's using information from the Kabbalah and to, the mystical branch of Judaism to do magic. Then you have natural magics, which included things that became sciences eventually. Like you have proto-sciences like astrology, alchemy, early medicine, and things like that. And then you had folk magic, which was, a very big category still going on today. Folk magic nowadays would be things like candle magic, witchcraft, hoodoo, things that, normal, average, everyday people do. Then you had folk medicine, which was non-medical, so quote unquote medical. So back in the day, in Middle Ages, Renaissance, all the doctors studied the Greeks as part of the revolution that Paracelsus led. And nowadays, too, medicine is done by highly trained individuals who are specialized. But you had people like herbalists, and you had these people called cunning folk who would make remedies, and they were not official doctors. but that kind of fell under the rubric of magic. So this is kind of like what has historically been considered magic in the past. Now, the question is, though, why are all those things magic? Because, like, some of them seem similar to each other, but some of them don't seem that similar. And so what are the similarities? Well, the similarities are that all of those things I mentioned involve people taking actions to increase the likelihood that a desired outcome will occur. So we see that word desire there from Austin Spare. And what's going on here is that all those different types of magic I mentioned, so, you know, Goetia, theurgy, nigromancy, necromancy, practical Kabbalah, natural magic, folk medicine, they all involve people taking actions to have something occur. And it was through what can be described as paranormal means. And what do I mean by paranormal? Well, paranormal means beyond the scope of normal scientific understanding. So many of those things I mentioned, during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the science had not advanced enough to explain what was going on. So they called it magic. Like a lot of alchemy became chemistry. But before the science of chemistry was founded in the late 1700s, 1800s, it was called magic. It was called alchemy because science didn't understand it. And the same thing is going on today. So things that are actions that people take that cause a change in the world, but you cannot explain it scientifically, this falls under the guise of magic. And most of this is related, can be explained via the science of human consciousness, which is a new science that is emerging against the materialist paradigm. So a really cool book came out about a year or so ago called Real Magic by Dean Radin. And, you know, in this book, you know, he kind of summarizes a lot of the literature explaining how some of the basic elements of magic are explained by peer-reviewed scientific research that many scientists and skeptics are horrified exists. But it's a really cool thing. So there's like, I have the saying, you know, magic has always been the mother of science. And that's because science comes from magic. Magic is always ahead of science. It's magic is doing things that science doesn't know about yet or can't explain. And also, magic does have some relation to religion. And that's because many religions do magical acts during their religious ceremonies. And this definition of magic here is very good because, number one, it allows you to, you know, find a single thread that classifies all of those different types of magic that I showed you and gets them in one category. It's a single definition that gives you the basic gist of all of them. So it answers Owen Davies' problem of that it's maddening trying to make a definition of magic. No, it's totally possible. That's it. And then the other thing about it is it lets you clearly distinguish magic from both science and religion. So science, if it's science, you can explain it scientifically. And many things that are considered magic are actually starting to be explained scientifically, especially with consciousness research. So it's no longer going to become magic after a while. The other thing is with religion, there's a lot of confusion because many religions have magical practices or use magic in them. So now with this definition, as a scholar, you can look at anything in religion, you can very quickly tell, is it magic or is it not? So another really amazing thing about having this definition of magic is that we can see that there is more to magic than just these categories that I mentioned. So more than just Goetia, theurgy, nigromancy, necromancy. Once we have this definition, we can look at things that people do. And lo and behold, there are many things that are magic that are not currently recognized as magic. So for example, I'm going to go through them here. The use of affirmations, especially in New Age teachings. Channeling or mediumship, especially where you're getting answers to things. Creative visualization, where you hold an image in your mind and then it becomes reality. Divination, to help like get a result or to give an answer to something. The process of exorcism, like as done by the Catholic Church. Energy healing, all forms of energy healing, like crystal healing, you know, Reiki, any kind of energy healing you do is a form of magic because science can't explain it. It's a change. You're doing something that affects a change in reality, and it's paranormal. Okay, the law of attraction. So the idea of raising your vibration to attract things to you is completely magical. All right, the use of lucky charms, that kind of falls into folk magic too, like the idea that you could have some object that would make you lucky. That's definitely magic. When you do a mantra to get something, like let's say you do a mantra for abundance or a mantra to become more feminine or masculine, any kind of like mantra is a form of magic if you're trying to achieve something with it. If you're just doing the mantra to adore the god or to honor the god, that's not magic so much. But if you're doing it to get something or to make something happen or to change something, then it's definitely magic. All right. The same goes for prayer. So anytime a person is praying, it doesn't matter what religion you are, is your faith. If you're asking God or an angel or anything, if you're asking for something to happen, something to change, you are doing magic. It's essentially a form of spell work. So that's something most people do not realize. Many in the United States, there are groups of Christians who say, "Oh, magic is evil," blah blah blah, and then they go and pray, which is a total hypocrisy because it's a form of magic. So they're doing something that they say is evil. Same with the prosperity theology and the gospel of health and wealth. Anything where you're asking a God to help you, or like the idea that God will reward those who are good, that's a form of magic because it's a paranormal explanation for how something could occur. In medicine, the placebo effect is a form of magic. Doctors really and scientists really can't explain the placebo effect. They say that it has to do with the mind, whatever, but that's not an explanation of what's going on. So it is, the placebo medicine causes a change. It's paranormal. It's not really explainable scientifically. They just say, well, it's just the mind, but that's not an explanation. It's not a mechanism. So that's a form of magic. Remote viewing, like, the idea that people can, using their mind, like meditating, they could see a building somewhere and draw a picture of it, or find a location of a secret military base or something. That's a form of magic. During Catholic Mass, the transubstitution or the Eucharist, where the wine and bread are, turned to the body and blood of Christ, that's a form of magic because you're turning a substance into the Christ. Doing a yoga kriya, if it's for something, like let's say you're doing a yoga kriya for financial abundance or for health or something like that, that is also a form of magic. And interesting, Aleister Crowley had yoga as one of his magical practices. So, what's the big deal about all this? Well, the big deal, why is this important? The big deal is that you're probably doing magic every day. Every time you prayed for something, every time you gave to a charity or you tithed your church, or every time, you did an energy healing or did a manifestation or anything, you're doing magic. So the important thing about it is that you want to understand what magic is and why you're doing it, so you'll do it more effectively and more efficiently and become better at it, rather than just doing things and not really knowing what they are. So some of the benefits of this, having a more, nuanced understanding of magic, well, you can save time and get results using techniques that actually work. So rather than like trying to guess what magic is or whether or not a magical practice is going to work, actually, if you understand what magic is, why you're doing it, how it works, then you can actually be very effective with it and do many things and combine different forms of magic together. So I always encourage people to combine pendulum healing with other forms of energy healing, so you're combining different magical practices there. Okay, understanding magic. You can make your life and the lives of others better by doing magic that is high consciousness. So unfortunately, like I mentioned in the past, many past and many current practitioners of magic practice what I would consider to be extremely low consciousness magic. Magic based on like desire, greed, revenge, anger, things like that. Generally very low consciousness, but it is possible to do high consciousness magic. It is possible to, help yourself while benefiting others as well, creating what's called win-win strategies. So part of my mission is to help raise the consciousness of magic and bring it to a higher level of consciousness. Okay, the other thing about it is as you learn more about magic, you can gain confidence by learning that you can influence the world via magical change. So you're no longer a victim of circumstance or of things just happening by seemingly random accidents. You actually have a tool or tools at your disposal to try to influence things. And that's why many people do magic, and that's why magic was done in the past. It was often done by people who felt they couldn't affect change in the world. Things were unfair, things were stacked against them. I'd like to change that so that we're not even in that place of being a victim from the start. But it's really great to know that, like, hey, I'm stuck in traffic right now. Hey, guess what? I can do some magic to improve that situation, make the traffic move more smoothly, and to get it flowing again, and to get the people the help that they need. Another example could be like, gain confidence. So someone in your family is not feeling well. Hey, I can do an energy healing on them. I can do a candle spell. I can do some moon magic. I can do some stuff to actually help them. My financial situation's not the greatest right now. What can I do about it? Hey, I can actually do some magic to help support my real life actions. So this is another very, very important thing about magic, is gaining the confidence to do it so that you can influence the world via magical change to raise consciousness for yourself and others, and to make the world a better place. All right. So what I'm doing to help do this is I'm offering a new program right now called Magick, the practice of magic. And in that course, we're going to do a deep dive into some magical practices that I've found to be very, very effective. So there are going to be 4 sessions spread out over the course of the next 3 months. And these sessions are going to be on the dates listed there, but they're going to be recorded. So you're going to be able to, study them at any time you want. And, oh, we hear a fire truck going on. So let's do some magic right now. So, dear God, highest good of all concerned, let's send love and healing to the fire truck going by. And let's change the energy to blue-green. And what do you know? The fire engine just stopped. See, that's the beauty of magic. I wasn't going to let it ruin this video. I was going to just do some magic, try to help the fire truck, help the people. Boom, it stopped. The interference is gone. That's what I'm talking about. That's the power of magic here. Okay, so I'm going to cover 4 different topics that I normally don't talk about. I normally talk about pendulum, but these are all compatible with pendulum healing. They're really powerful techniques, and I have my own unique take on them. Whether you're an expert or a beginner at doing magic, you will find that these practices are powerful, that the presentation is extremely easy and clear, and you'll be able to implement what I teach you right away. So first session is going to be on moon magic, and we have a new super moon coming up this month in August, and it's going to be a really powerful time to be doing some magic. So it's going to be perfectly timed for that. You'll get the techniques in the course, you'll get theory in the course, practice, and then between the 2 sessions, you'll get a chance to practice with the super moon, which is going to be fun. Then we're going to do sun magic after that on September 11th. Now, the reason why we're doing the sun magic is because the equinox, the fall equinox, is coming up. And the solstices and the equinoxes are the best times to do sun magic. You can also do it every day, too. But sun magic, really powerful, so I have it timed for that. Then I'm going to do a session on candle magic. I'm going to be presenting a slightly different take on that than you'll get in books and the internet. And I'm also going to be doing sigil magic, which I'll once again do a slightly different take on that. But so it's going to be great stuff here, good for beginners, good for advanced. And if you have any interest in this topic at all, I highly recommend you show up. If you like this video, it kind of gives you a feel for what it's going to be like. I go deep. I've got lots of insights, lots of curiosity, lots of observations, lots of practice. So if you want to find out more about this, please visit my website, pendulumhealing.com. Also, you can write your questions and comments below. And, until next time, continue doing your healing magic. And I hope this video was educational and that you learned something and that you enjoyed it. And I will be seeing you around. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.